Edward Langston had everything a man could dream of. A life filled with luxury, power, and success. His name was known in every corner of the city. He owned hotels, businesses, and cars that most people could only imagine. But even with all his money, Edward felt helpless for the first time in his life. His beloved mother, Margaret Langston, was dying, and no one could save her. Margaret had been sick for months. It started with small things. Feeling tired, losing her appetite, and getting dizzy often. Edward took her to the best hospitals, hired famous doctors, and even flew her overseas for treatment. Every specialist gave him hope at first, but that hope never lasted. One by one, the doctors told him the same thing. "We're doing our best, but her body isn't responding." At first, Edward refused to believe it. He was used to solving problems with money. When something broke, he bought a new one. When someone refused him, he paid more. But this time, nothing worked. No matter how much money he offered, no one could bring back the glow in his mother's eyes. He remembered how strong she used to be. Margaret wasn't just his mother. She was his strength, his teacher. When his father died, she raised Edward alone. She taught him to be ambitious, to never give up. Every success he had was because of her sacrifices. And now, watching her grow weaker each day was tearing him apart. Edward stayed in her hospital room for hours. The soft beep of the heart monitor was the only sound that kept him company at night. Sometimes he would talk to her, even though she barely opened her eyes. "Mom," he'd whisper, holding her hand. "I promise I'll fix this. Just hold on a little longer." But deep down he was terrified. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's condition worsened. The doctors ran every test they could. They changed her medicine, tried new machines, and brought in specialists from other countries. Edward approved everything. He didn't care how much it cost. He even offered a $1 million bonus to any doctor who could find a cure. But nothing changed. One evening, after another long meeting with the medical team, the head doctor pulled Edward aside. His face was pale, his eyes heavy with pity. "Mr. Langston," he said softly, "we've done everything possible. Your mother's body is shutting down. You should prepare yourself." Those words hit Edward like a hammer. For a moment, the world around him went silent. He felt dizzy. The man who controlled everything suddenly couldn't control the one thing that mattered most: his mother's life. He didn't answer the doctor. He just nodded weakly and walked back to the hospital room. Margaret lay there, breathing slowly. Her silver hair spread across the pillow, and her skin looked almost transparent. Edward sat beside her and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You always said I was strong," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I'm not. Not without you." He felt tears roll down his cheeks, something that hadn't happened in years. He had cried as a child when he fell and scraped his knee, but since becoming an adult, he thought tears were a sign of weakness. That night, he realized how wrong he had been. The hospital room was cold and silent. The machines blinked softly in the dark. Edward couldn't stop thinking. How could all his money mean nothing now? He could buy rare diamonds, private islands, and even politicians, but not a single breath for his mother. It was the cruelest truth he had ever faced. For the next few days, Edward refused to leave her side. He barely ate, barely slept. Nurses came and went, adjusting her IVs and checking her vitals, but he didn't notice. All he could think about was her smile. The way she used to wake him up for school. The way she hugged him when he got his first business deal. The way she always said, "Don't forget, my boy, kindness is richer than gold." And yet, he realized he hadn't been kind in a long time. He had become a man who saw life through numbers, profits, percentages, and contracts. He had no time for people who couldn't give him something in return. But sitting there, watching his mother fight for every breath, Edward began to see life differently. Late one night, when the hospital lights dimmed and the hallways grew quiet, Edward stepped out of the room for some air. He leaned against the cold wall, looking through the glass at his mother. That was when he noticed one of the maids passing by, holding a tray. She moved quietly, respectfully, like she didn't want to disturb anyone. He didn't know her name and he didn't care to. She was just another worker in his world. But what he didn't know was that this small, humble maid, and her young daughter who sometimes came to help, would soon change everything. They would bring him something that no doctor, no medicine, and no amount of money ever could hope. Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. If only someone could do the impossible, he murmured to himself, not realizing that those words were about to come true in a way he could never imagine. That night, as the monitors kept beeping softly and Margaret's breathing slowed, Edward felt the weight of helplessness like never before. The billionaire who once believed he could control the world had just met the one thing money could not conquer, and it was only the beginning of a miracle he would never forget. Maria had worked in the Langston mansion for almost 10 years. Every morning, before the sun rose, she tied her hair back, put on her simple uniform, and began her day. The house was huge, 10 bedrooms, shining marble floors, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. To outsiders, it looked like a dream place to work. But for Maria, it was just a place that helped her survive. She was a quiet woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Life hadn't been easy for her. Her husband had died when their daughter, Sophia, was just a child. Since then, Maria had done every kind of work. Washing clothes, cleaning houses, cooking. Anything to feed her daughter and keep her in school. The Langston mansion was her best job yet, even though the work was hard. Maria's daughter, Sophia, was everything to her. The girl was only 16 but already wise beyond her years. She was quiet like her mother, polite to everyone, and always helped without being asked. When Maria couldn't afford a babysitter, she brought Sophia with her to the mansion after school. Sophia would sit in the kitchen, doing homework or helping the cooks peel vegetables. Everyone in the mansion liked Sophia. She never caused trouble, never complained. The other workers often said, "Maria, your daughter is different. There's something special about her." Maria would just smile proudly. She didn't know what they meant, but she felt it too. Sophia had a calmness about her, a peace that made people feel safe around her. One afternoon, when Maria finished cleaning the guest rooms, she found Sophia standing quietly near the grand staircase, looking at a painting. It was an old portrait of Edward's mother, Margaret, when she was young. Sophia's eyes were soft as she stared at it. "She looks kind," she said. Maria nodded. "She was," she replied. "Before she got sick, she always smiled at me. She used to say thank you even when I was just cleaning the floor. Not everyone here does that." Sophia turned to her mother and asked, "Is she the one who's in the hospital?" Maria sighed. "Yes, child. Mr. Edward hasn't been the same since she fell ill. He used to travel and laugh, but now he just stays at the hospital all day. I feel sorry for him." Sophia looked thoughtful. "Maybe he just needs hope," she said quietly. Maria smiled at her daughter's words. "Hope doesn't always come easy, Sophia, especially to people who think money can fix everything." That evening, when they returned home, Maria noticed that Sophia was unusually quiet. During dinner, she kept staring at her hands. "What's wrong?" Maria asked. Sophia hesitated, then said softly, "Mama, today when I saw the picture of Mr. Edward's mother, I felt something strange, like I needed to help her." Maria frowned gently. "Help her? But how, my dear? She's very sick. Even doctors can't do much now." "I know," Sophia said, lowering her voice, "but maybe it's not about medicine. Maybe it's about faith." Maria didn't know what to say. She had heard Sophia talk like this before. Ever since she was little, Sophia had moments where she seemed different. Once, when a neighbor's baby was sick, Sophia had sat beside the crib, humming a soft tune. The baby stopped crying and fell asleep peacefully, and the next day the fever was gone. Everyone called it luck. Maria never told anyone else, afraid people would start gossiping. The next morning, at the mansion, Maria tried to keep her daughter busy in the kitchen, so she wouldn't wander around. But Sophia was curious. She liked the feeling of the big house. Quiet halls, tall windows, and the faint smell of fresh flowers that always filled the rooms. Around noon, while Maria was dusting the sitting room, she heard raised voices from upstairs. It was Mr. Edward talking loudly on the phone. He sounded frustrated, desperate. "How can there be nothing left to do?" he shouted. "You're the best doctor in the country." The sound made Maria stop. She felt a deep sadness for him. She knew that kind of pain, the fear of losing someone you love and being unable to stop it. She prayed silently for his mother as she cleaned. Sophia, standing near the hallway, had also heard him. Her heart ached. She didn't know the man personally, but his voice carried so much sorrow that she wanted to do something, anything, to make it better. She didn't understand why, but she felt drawn toward that sadness, like her heart knew it could help. Later that evening, when the other workers had gone home, Maria and Sophia were about to leave too. But Sophia stopped near the staircase and looked toward the room where she had seen the portrait of Margaret. She whispered softly, "Mama, do you think I could see her? Just once." Maria was startled. "Sophia, no. That's not our place. Mr. Edward wouldn't allow it. We are just workers here." Sophia nodded but didn't say anything. Her eyes were filled with quiet determination. "I just feel like she needs peace," she murmured. Maria touched her daughter's shoulder gently. "Sometimes wanting to help is enough. But don't do anything foolish. Okay?" Sophia smiled faintly and nodded. "I won't." But deep inside, she already knew that something was pulling her toward that hospital room. Something beyond logic, something stronger than fear. She didn't know if it was faith, instinct, or love, but she knew she couldn't ignore it for long. That night, as Maria and Sophia walked home under the dim streetlights, the air was cool and quiet. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but Sophia's mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the billionaire's sick mother, about her pale face in the portrait, her kind eyes, and the sound of Edward's broken voice. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a deep connection, as if she was meant to cross paths with that woman. And though she didn't yet know how, she was certain of one thing. Soon she would. And when that moment came, nothing, not wealth, not science, not even reason, would be able to explain what she was destined to do. The next few days passed slowly. Edward hardly left the hospital. His mother's condition was getting worse every hour. The doctor spoke in low voices now, using words like prepare and final stage. Edward didn't want to hear them anymore. He spent most of his time sitting beside his mother's bed, holding her hand, praying silently, though he had never believed much in prayer. Back at the mansion, the staff spoke softly too. Everyone felt sad seeing how different their boss had become. The confident, proud man they once knew now looked tired, broken, and pale. Maria felt sorry for him. Every evening when she went home, she whispered a small prayer for his mother. Sophia always listened carefully and added her own gentle words. "May God send her comfort." One evening, Maria had to stay late because the mansion needed to be cleaned before Edward's return. Sophia went with her, carrying her books as usual. The house felt emptier than ever, as if the sadness from the hospital had followed Edward home. The air inside was heavy. Maria started cleaning the living room while Sophia sat quietly near the window. She could see the city lights from there, soft golden dots blinking in the distance. After a while, she got up and walked slowly down the hallway. Her steps were light, and the silence made every sound seem louder. As she turned the corner, she heard a voice, sharp, frustrated, filled with pain. It came from one of the guest rooms. The door was slightly open. She peeked inside and saw Edward standing there, talking loudly on his phone. His face looked pale, his eyes red from exhaustion. "I don't care how much it costs," he shouted. "Just find someone who can help her. There must be another treatment, another doctor, something." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. His expression changed, from anger to despair. "What do you mean there's nothing else?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "You can't just give up." Then he hung up the phone and sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Sophia stood frozen at the door. Her heart ached seeing him like that. He looked completely lost, like a child who didn't know where to turn. She had never seen a rich man so helpless. For a few seconds, she hesitated, unsure if she should speak. But something inside her, That same strange feeling she had before pushed her forward. She took a small step into the room. "Sir?" she said softly. Edward looked up, startled. "Who's there?" "It's me, Sophia," she said nervously. "Maria's daughter." Edward frowned. "What are you doing here?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just heard you talking about your mother." Edward sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Yes, my mother. Everyone's given up on her. The doctors, the specialists, even the nurses. They all say the same thing, that there's nothing left to do." Sophia stepped a little closer. "Maybe there's still hope," she said softly. Edward gave a weak laugh. "Hope?" He looked at her like she had said something foolish. "I've spent millions on hope, child. It doesn't work." She didn't move away. "Sometimes hope doesn't come from money or doctors," she said gently. "Sometimes it comes from faith." Edward stared at her for a moment, trying to understand this young girl standing before him, speaking with such calm confidence. "Faith?" he repeated. "Do you think faith can save someone when even medicine can't?" Sophia nodded slowly. "I don't know if it can save, but it can heal hearts. And sometimes, when hearts heal, bodies follow." For a second, Edward didn't say anything. Then he shook his head. "You're just a child," he muttered, trying to hide the pain in his voice. "You don't understand how the world works." Sophia lowered her eyes but didn't walk away. "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I understand pain. I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer." Something about her words made Edward stop. He looked at her again, really looked at her. She wasn't scared or nervous anymore. Her eyes were calm and kind, filled with something he couldn't describe, something pure. "What did you say your name was?" he asked. "Sophia," she answered quietly. "Sophia," he repeated as if testing how it sounded. "Go home, Sophia. This is not your burden to carry." She gave him a small smile. "Sometimes, sir, we don't choose the burdens we carry. They choose us." Edward stared at her in silence. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Sophia stepped back toward the door. "I'll pray for her," she said. He didn't answer, but his eyes followed her until she disappeared down the hallway. For the first time in days, Edward felt something strange. Not hope exactly, but a spark of warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. When Sophia returned to the kitchen, Maria noticed her quiet face. "Where were you?" she asked. Sophia looked at her mother and simply said, "Talking to Mr. Edward." Maria's eyes widened. "You did what?" "Oh, Sophia, you shouldn't bother him. He's already going through so much." "I didn't bother him, Mama," Sophia replied softly. "I just told him not to lose hope." Maria sighed deeply, shaking her head. "Child, you have such a big heart. But remember, people like him don't believe in simple things like hope anymore." Sophia didn't argue. She just looked out the window at the dark sky and whispered, "Maybe he will soon." That night, when Edward finally lay down on the small couch in his mother's hospital room, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying Sophia's words. Sometimes hope doesn't come from money or doctors. Sometimes it comes from faith. He didn't want to believe her, but deep inside, something told him those words meant more than he understood. He closed his eyes, unaware that in just a few hours, that same girl, the maid's quiet daughter, would do something that would change his life forever. The night was quiet in the hospital. The only sounds were the slow beeping of machines and the soft whisper of nurses walking in the hallway. Edward sat beside his mother's bed, half asleep, his head resting on his arms. He hadn't slept properly in days. His mother's breathing was weak, and every breath she took sounded like a struggle. The doctors had told him that it was only a matter of time. He wanted to believe they were wrong, but deep down he felt that they weren't. His mother's hands were cold, her skin pale. Her eyes stayed closed most of the time now. He spoke to her sometimes, hoping she could still hear him. "Mom, it's me, Edward," he would whisper. "You're going to be fine, I promise." But his voice often broke before he finished the sentence. That night, the clock struck midnight. Edward finally leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. His heart was heavy, and he wished for a miracle, though he no longer believed in them. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Sophia couldn't sleep either. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling. She kept thinking about Edward's sad face and his mother lying in the hospital. Something inside her wouldn't let her rest. It was like a quiet voice in her heart saying, "Go." First, she tried to ignore it. "It's crazy," she whispered to herself. "I can't just go to a hospital. I'm only a maid's daughter." But the feeling grew stronger. Finally, she got out of bed, put on her simple clothes, and woke her mother. "Mama," she said softly, "I need to see her." Mr. Edward's mother. Maria sat up, shocked. "Sophia, what are you saying? It's the middle of the night. You can't just go there." "I have to," Sophia said, her voice calm but firm. "I can't explain it, but I feel like she's calling for help. Not with words, but with her heart." Maria was torn. She knew her daughter wasn't an ordinary girl. She had seen small miracles happen around her before, things no one could explain. Still, the thought of walking into a hospital full of guards and doctors scared her. "They won't let you in, Sophia," she said. "You could get in trouble." Sophia looked at her mother with gentle eyes. "Sometimes, Mama, we have to listen to the voice inside us, even if it makes no sense." Maria hesitated for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Go, but be careful." Within an hour, Sophia reached the hospital. The night guard at the front desk recognized her as the maid's daughter. She had come before with her mother to deliver food for Edward's staff. "What are you doing here so late?" he asked kindly. Sophia smiled nervously. "Mr. Edward forgot something important at home. I came to give it to him." The guard looked doubtful but then nodded and let her pass. She walked quietly through the halls, guided by her heart more than her memory. When she reached the top floor, she saw the door slightly open and the dim light from inside spilling into the hallway. Edward was sleeping on the chair beside the bed. Sophia stepped inside slowly. The room felt heavy with sadness, but she wasn't afraid. She looked at Margaret, pale, weak, her chest moving faintly with every breath. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She walked closer, feeling a strange warmth building in her hands. "Mrs. Langston," she whispered softly, "I know we've never met, but I think your heart is kind. You have a son who loves you so much, and he's lost without you. Please, if there's still a way, come back to him." She placed her hands gently over Margaret's chest and closed her eyes. The room was still. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the heart monitor made a stronger sound. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm became steadier. Sophia didn't move. She whispered a small prayer her grandmother had taught her long ago. Words about light, peace, and healing. She didn't know if anyone was listening, but she believed. Then something strange happened. The air in the room felt lighter. Edward stirred in his sleep, sensing movement. Margaret's fingers twitched slightly. Sophia opened her eyes and saw color returning to the old woman's face. Her breathing grew stronger. Edward woke up suddenly, alarmed by the sound of the machines. "What's happening?" he said, standing quickly. When he saw Sophia, his eyes widened. What are you doing here?" Sophia stepped back, her hands still trembling. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "I just wanted to help." Edward looked at the monitor, then at his mother. Her heartbeat was steady, stronger than it had been in days. The doctor on duty rushed in, alerted by the noise. "What's going on?" he asked, staring at the readings. This can't be right." Margaret's eyes fluttered open slightly. Her lips moved, and a faint whisper came out. "Edward!" He froze. "Mom!" He leaned closer, his heart racing. "Mom, can you hear me?" Tears filled his eyes as she nodded weakly. You're here," she whispered. Sophia stood silently in the corner, watching. She didn't understand how or why it happened, but she felt peace wash over her. It was as if something beyond her had guided her hands. The doctors checked everything, still in disbelief. "Her vitals are stable," one of them said. This is impossible. Edward turned to Sophia, still trying to process everything. What did you do? He asked, his voice shaking. Sophia looked at him and said softly, I didn't heal her. I only asked God to give her peace. Maybe that's all she needed. For a moment, no one spoke. Edward looked at his mother again, then at the young girl standing before him. The realization hit him hard. Money hadn't saved his mother. Science hadn't saved her. A simple prayer from a maid's daughter had done what all his wealth could not. He sank to his knees beside the bed, holding his mother's hand tightly. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. But when he looked up to thank Sophia again, she was already gone. Quietly walking down the hallway, her heart calm, knowing she had done what she was meant to do. That night, Edward sat beside his mother, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. The word miracle echoed in his mind again and again. He didn't know how to explain what had happened. He only knew that a girl with a pure heart had done the impossible. Morning sunlight entered the hospital room softly, shining through the white curtains. The first golden rays touched Margaret's face, and for the first time in many weeks, she looked peaceful. Her breathing was steady, her color had returned, and there was a faint smile on her lips. The heart monitor beeped in a normal rhythm, almost like it was singing. Edward sat by her bedside, staring at her in disbelief. He hadn't slept all night. What happened a few hours ago kept replaying in his mind. The maid's daughter standing there quietly, her hands glowing softly under the warm hospital light, whispering something he couldn't understand. Then the impossible had happened. His mother's heart had become strong again, her pulse steady. He looked down at his mother and whispered, Mom, you scared me. His voice trembled as he spoke. Margaret slowly opened her eyes. Edward, she said weakly, but her tone was clear and calm. Tears filled his eyes. You're awake. You're really awake. She smiled faintly. Why are you crying? I told you I'm stronger than I look. Her words were light, but they carried warmth. Edward laughed softly through his tears. You scared everyone. You know that? When the doctors entered the room that morning, they were completely shocked. The last time they saw Margaret, she was barely alive. Now, she was sitting up, asking for water. The head doctor checked her chart, blinking in confusion. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Her vitals are normal. She's recovering faster than we thought possible. Edward couldn't stop smiling, though his mind was full of questions. The doctors surrounded his mother, running tests and checking every machine again. Maybe the medicine started working, one of them suggested. Maybe it was her body's natural response. But Edward wasn't convinced. He knew it wasn't medicine. It wasn't coincidence. He had seen it happen right in front of him. After a few hours, the doctors confirmed what they couldn't explain. She's stable, they said. We don't understand it, but she's healing. Edward walked out of the room and stood in the hallway, trying to clear his head. His heart was still racing. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, the maid's daughter who came in the middle of the night. She had said she only wanted to help, and somehow she did. He tried to find her that morning. He called the mansion, but Maria and Sophia weren't there yet. He told the staff, when they come, send them to me immediately. His voice was calm but firm. He needed answers. Back at their small house, Maria was just finishing breakfast when Sophia came out of her room. She looked tired but peaceful, as if she had slept after carrying a heavy weight. Maria watched her closely. Did you go? She asked softly. Sophia nodded. Yes. Maria's heart skipped a beat. And? Sophia smiled faintly. She's fine now. She's going to live. Maria's eyes widened. What do you mean she's fine? How can you know that? I just know, Sophia said quietly. You'll hear about it soon. Maria didn't understand what her daughter had done, but she felt something change in the air. There was calmness around Sophia, like the world itself had softened. A few hours later, a car stopped outside their small home. A man in a black suit stepped out. Mr. Langston wants to see you and your daughter, he said politely. Maria's hands shook. "Oh no," she whispered. "Did we do something wrong?" Sophia touched her mother's hand gently. "It's okay, Mama. He's not angry." When they arrived at the hospital, Edward met them in the hallway. He looked different, no longer the cold, proud man they were used to seeing. His face showed deep gratitude. "Maria," he said quietly, "and Sophia." He paused, struggling to find words. "Last night, something happened. Something I can't explain." He looked directly at Sophia. "You were there, weren't you?" Sophia lowered her eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir." Edward stepped closer. "Tell me how you did it. What did you do?" She shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything, sir. I only prayed. I asked for peace for her heart." Edward frowned, not out of anger but confusion. "Prayed?" "Yes," she said simply. "Sometimes peace heals faster than medicine." For a moment Edward didn't speak. Then he sighed, looking both amazed and lost. "I don't understand how, but thank you. You gave me back my mother." His voice cracked, full of emotion. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, my daughter didn't mean to cause any trouble. Please don't be upset." He interrupted gently. "Upset? Maria, she saved my mother's life. I don't know how to repay something like that." Sophia smiled shyly. "You don't need to repay me, sir. Just be kind to people. That's enough." Her words hit Edward deeply. For years, he had been surrounded by power, greed, and competition. Now, a young girl with nothing had reminded him of something pure kindness. Later that day, Margaret asked to see Sophia. When the girl entered the room, Margaret smiled warmly. "Come closer, child," she said. "I remember you. You were here last night." Sophia nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret took her hand. "I don't know what you did, but when you touched me, I saw light. It felt warm, like someone was telling me it wasn't my time yet." Sophia smiled, her eyes soft. "Maybe that was your son's love reaching you," she said. Margaret squeezed her hand. "Maybe it was yours." Tears rolled down Edward's face as he watched them. It was the first time he had cried out of happiness in years. News of Margaret's sudden recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses whispered about it in the hallways. "It's a miracle," they said. "She was dying last night, and now she's awake, talking, smiling." Edward didn't argue. For once, he didn't care about science or explanations. He only knew that something divine had happened. As Maria and Sophia left the hospital that evening, Edward walked them to the door. "Thank you," he said again. "You've done something I'll never forget." Sophia turned back and smiled. "You don't have to remember me, sir. Just remember that miracles happen when hearts believe." Edward stood there, watching them go, feeling humbled in a way he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who had everything realized that true power didn't come from money. It came from love, faith, and the quiet kindness of a simple girl who believed in the impossible. Days passed, and the Langston mansion, once cold and silent, began to feel alive again. The servants smiled more, laughter returned to the hallways, and even the air seemed lighter. Margaret was recovering faster than anyone expected. Every morning, she walked a little, ate a little, and spoke with new energy. The doctors called it a miracle recovery, but Edward knew it was something more, something he couldn't explain with science or reason. He sat beside his mother one morning, watching her enjoy her breakfast by the window. "You look radiant today," he said softly. Margaret smiled. "I feel radiant, like I've been given another chance." Edward nodded slowly. "You have, and I don't know how to thank the person responsible." "You mean the maid's daughter?" she asked knowingly. "Yes, Sophia," he said, the name leaving his lips with a mix of wonder and guilt. "I still can't believe what she did. I was cruel to her mother, you know. I treated them like they didn't matter." Margaret reached for her son's hand. "Maybe this happened for a reason, Edward. Sometimes, life uses humble people to remind us of what really matters." Edward sighed, looking down. "I've spent years thinking money could fix everything. I thought power meant control. But when you were lying there, dying, all my money was useless. And then, That girl appeared with nothing but faith in her heart, and she did what no one else could. His mother smiled softly. Faith can move mountains, my son. You just never tried to see it before. Those words stayed in Edward's mind all day. He couldn't focus on business meetings or calls. The more he thought about it, the more restless he became. Finally, he stood up and told his assistant, "Cancel everything today. I'm going out." He drove himself to Maria and Sophia's small neighborhood, far from the shiny towers and luxury streets he was used to. The narrow roads were dusty, and children played barefoot near small houses. People stared at his expensive car as he passed. He stopped in front of Maria's modest home and stepped out, feeling oddly nervous. Maria opened the door, startled. "Mr. Langston?" she gasped, quickly wiping her hands on her apron. "Please, come in." He smiled politely. "Thank you, Maria. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, sir, not at all," she said quickly, moving aside. "Please have a seat." The living room was simple but clean. The walls were faded, yet there was warmth everywhere, a feeling of love and peace. On a small table sat a framed photo of Maria and Sophia, smiling together. Sophia appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him. "Mr. Langston," she greeted softly. Edward stood up. "Sophia," he said, his voice sincere, "I wanted to see you, to thank you properly this time." She smiled shyly. "You already did, sir." He shook his head. "No, not like this. I needed to come here, to your home. I've lived my whole life surrounded by wealth, but I've never felt the kind of peace I feel here. You and your mother. You've taught me more than anyone else ever has." Maria's eyes softened. "You're too kind, sir. We didn't do anything special." Edward looked at her. "You raised a remarkable daughter. What she did for my mother." He stopped for a moment, his voice trembling. "There's no way to repay that. But I want to help you both, in any way I can." Maria shook her head quickly. "Sir, please. We don't want money. We're just happy that your mother is better." Sophia nodded in agreement. "Mama's right. We didn't help for reward." Edward smiled. "I know. And that's what makes it even more powerful." He looked around again. The worn furniture, the patched curtains, the small cracks in the wall, and yet, it felt like the happiest place he'd ever been. "Can I ask you something, Sophia?" he said finally. "Of course," she replied. "That night, when you healed her, what really happened? What did you feel?" Sophia thought for a moment before speaking. "I felt light," she said softly. "Not from me, but around me, like something was guiding me. I just held her hand and prayed that her pain would leave her. I didn't know if it would work. I only hoped." Edward listened in silence. There was truth in her words, and something deeper, purity. After a pause, he said quietly, "You have a gift, a rare one, but even more than that, you have a heart full of compassion. That's something this world needs." Sophia blushed, lowering her eyes. "I just do what feels right." Edward smiled sadly. "If everyone did that, the world would be a different place." Before leaving, he handed Maria a small envelope. "Please take this. It's not charity. It's gratitude. For your kindness, and for reminding me what humanity means." Maria hesitated, then finally accepted it with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. You didn't have to." As Edward turned to leave, Sophia spoke quietly. "Mr. Langston?" He stopped and looked back. "Your mother still has healing left to do, but not just in her body. Her heart needs peace too. Spend more time with her. She needs you." Edward felt a lump in his throat. "I will. Thank you, Sophia." As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the small house fading behind him. Yet, inside his heart, something new had begun. A warmth he hadn't felt in years. When he returned home, he went straight to his mother's room. Margaret was sitting with a blanket over her legs, smiling when she saw him. "Back already?" she asked. He nodded. "I went to see them, and..." He sat beside her and took her hand. "You were right, Mother. They reminded me of everything I'd forgotten. Kindness, faith, love." Margaret smiled proudly. Then maybe this was the real miracle. Not just my healing, but yours. Edward looked at her, and for the first time in many years he truly smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. The kind that comes from a heart finally free of pride. Outside, the evening sky turned golden. The world felt quiet and calm, as if nature itself was whispering that something sacred had changed. That night, Edward stood by his mother's window, looking out at the stars. He thought of Sophia's words, "Spend more time with her," and he knew that from that moment on, he would never take love or life for granted again. In the following weeks, word about Margaret Langston's sudden recovery spread far beyond the hospital. At first, it was just whispers among the nurses. The woman who came back from the edge of death. But soon, journalists began to hear the story too. How could a dying billionaire's mother, declared hopeless by top doctors, wake up perfectly fine overnight? The news sounded impossible, yet it was true. Edward tried to keep it private, but stories like that never stay hidden for long. Within days, newspapers printed headlines like, "Miracle recovery of billionaire's mother leaves doctors speechless." Some people called it luck. Others called it divine intervention. And then, a few curious reporters began to ask, who was there that night? Who helped her? Edward avoided interviews. He didn't want Sophia's name dragged into the public eye. He felt it was something sacred, something not meant to be turned into gossip. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, as Margaret was sitting in the garden enjoying the sunshine, one of her old friends, Mrs. Whitmore, came to visit. She was a woman who loved drama and storytelling. When she heard the tale, she couldn't stop talking. "A maid's daughter healed you?" she asked, eyes wide. "How extraordinary! This must be told to the world." Margaret smiled kindly. "Maybe it's not meant to be told to everyone. Some miracles are meant to stay quiet." But Mrs. Whitmore didn't listen. A few days later, she told a journalist friend everything she'd heard, adding her own version of the story, of course. Soon, a headline appeared in a popular online news site, "The maid's daughter who healed the billionaire's mother. A miracle in the city." The story exploded like fire. People shared it everywhere. Some mocked it, others believed it completely. A few even started visiting the Langston mansion, hoping to see the girl with healing hands. Edward was furious at first. "I didn't want this," he told his mother. "They'll disturb that girl's life. She doesn't deserve this attention." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You can't stop people from believing in hope, Edward. Maybe this story will give others faith again." Meanwhile, in their small home, Maria and Sophia had no idea what was happening. It was only when neighbors began knocking on their door that they realized something was different. "Is it true, Sophia?" one woman asked, holding her little boy by the hand. "Did you really heal that rich man's mother?" Sophia froze, unsure what to say. I only prayed for her," she said softly. Another man stepped forward. "Please, my wife is sick. Can you pray for her too?" Soon, more and more people started coming, sick children, worried parents, old men who could barely walk. They all came with one hope. Maybe this young girl could do for them what she did for the billionaire's mother. Maria didn't know what to do. "Sophia, this is getting out of control," she said, her voice full of worry. "These people think you have some kind of magic." Sophia shook her head. "I don't, Mama. I just have faith. But I can't send them away. They're hurting." So one by one she met them. She didn't promise miracles. She only sat with them, listened, and prayed sincerely for them. Sometimes people went away feeling better. Sometimes they didn't. But each person left with tears in their eyes. Not of disappointment, but of peace. Word kept spreading. "She's an angel," people whispered. "God listens to her." Soon, even the media found her little house. Cameras and microphones waited outside, flashing lights every time she appeared. Reporters shouted questions. "Sophia, how did you heal Mrs. Langston? Do you have a special power?" Sophia always gave the same answer. "I don't heal. God does. I just pray." Edward watched all this from afar, his heart heavy. He hadn't wanted this chaos for her. Finally, he drove to their home again, this time stepping in between the reporters. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Leave her alone. She's just a kind young woman, not a miracle worker for your headlines." He helped them close the door and turned to Sophia. "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to keep it quiet, but people can't stop talking." Sophia smiled softly. "It's okay, Mr. Langston. If they believe something good came from it, maybe that's fine. At least they're talking about faith instead of money or hate." Her calmness amazed him. Even under pressure, she remained pure, kind, and humble. "You really are something special, Sophia," he said quietly. That evening, when the reporters finally left, Maria sat by the window, worried. "I don't want this to ruin your life, Sophia." Sophia shook her head. "It won't, Mama. Everything happens for a reason. Maybe people just needed a reminder that miracles can still happen." The next day, something surprising happened. A group of doctors from the same hospital came to see Sophia. They weren't there for fame. They genuinely wanted to understand what had happened that night. "We don't know what you did," one doctor said. "But whatever it was, Mrs. Langston's recovery can't be explained medically. Her heart condition was irreversible. We want to study how her emotional or spiritual state changed." Sophia listened politely. "You don't need to study anything," she said gently. "Sometimes healing begins when someone feels loved and believed in. That's all I did. I gave her peace." The doctors exchanged silent looks. They couldn't argue with that. When they left, Edward called Sophia again. "My mother wants to see you," he said. "She insists." Sophia smiled. "Of course I'll come." That evening, she visited the Langston mansion once more. Margaret hugged her tightly. "Because of you, my dear, I'm alive. But more than that, I'm awake. You reminded me to live with gratitude." Sophia smiled softly. "I'm happy you're better, ma'am. That's all I ever wanted." Edward stood beside them, looking at both women, one from wealth, one from simplicity, and realized that they were the same in heart. When Sophia left that night, he stood at the door watching her disappear down the long driveway. He knew that this girl had changed not just his mother's life, but his own, and now even the world's. People everywhere were starting to talk about kindness again, faith again, miracles again. And deep inside, Edward Langston knew this was only the beginning. Months had passed since that unforgettable night when the maid's daughter healed the billionaire's mother. The world had changed in quiet but powerful ways. News stations had long moved on to other stories, but the memory of that miracle still lived in the hearts of many. In the city, people still whispered about the humble girl who brought a dying woman back to life. Not with medicine or money, but with faith. Margaret Langston had fully recovered now. Her cheeks were rosy, her laughter filled the mansion, and she often spent her mornings tending to the flowers in the garden. She had a glow that even doctors couldn't explain. Every day, she thanked God and the young girl who gave her a second chance. One afternoon, as Margaret and Edward sat together having tea in the garden, she said softly, "Edward, do you know what I've been thinking?" He smiled. "That you missed the hospital food?" She chuckled. "No, my dear. I've been thinking about how to give back. I was given life again for a reason. I don't want to waste it." Edward leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to help those who can't afford medicine or care," she said with warmth in her eyes. "Let's open a foundation. Not for show, not for fame, but to truly help people. And I want it to be named after her. Sophia." Edward looked at his mother in surprise. "The Sophia Foundation?" "Yes," she said, "because she reminded me that kindness and love can heal in ways money never can." Edward felt a lump in his throat. He nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful idea, Mother. She deserves it." The next few weeks were filled with planning. Edward, once known as a hard businessman, worked with a new spirit. He met with doctors, charity workers, and volunteers. But this time, it wasn't about profit or prestige. It was about purpose. When the foundation was ready, he visited Maria and Sophia's small home again. Maria was hanging clothes outside when she saw his car. She quickly called out, "Sophia, Mr. Langston is here." Sophia stepped out, her eyes calm and warm as always. Good afternoon, sir. Edward smiled kindly. Good afternoon, Sophia. My mother and I have something to show you. Will you come with me? They drove through the city, past tall buildings and busy streets, until they reached a new building with a shining sign that read, "The Sophia Foundation for Hope and Healing." Sophia's eyes widened. She looked up at the sign, unable to speak. You named it after me?" Edward nodded. "You gave my mother her life back. Now, through this foundation, we'll give others a chance to live too. Free medical care, emotional support, and help for those who've lost hope." Maria wiped a tear from her eye. "Oh, sir, this is too much." "No," Edward said softly. "It's the least we can do." Sophia walked through the new building. Clean halls, kind faces, and people who were ready to help. Everywhere she looked, she saw hope. On the wall was a picture of her holding Margaret's hand, taken quietly by one of the nurses that miraculous night. Below it were the words, "Where there is love, healing begins." Sophia touched the frame gently, her heart full. "I don't know what to say." "You've already said it, Sophia," Edward replied. "Through what you did." Soon, the foundation began helping hundreds of people. Families who couldn't afford hospital bills found treatment there. Children who had lost hope were given care. And every person who entered the building left with a little more faith in life. Sophia visited often, praying for patience and spending time with those who needed comfort. She never acted like someone special. She just listened, held their hands, and smiled. Somehow, her presence alone gave people peace. One evening, as the sun was setting, Margaret called Sophia to the mansion again. When Sophia arrived, Margaret was sitting in her favorite chair, wrapped in a soft shawl. She looked peaceful, her eyes glowing. "My dear," Margaret said, holding Sophia's hand, "I wanted to see you one last time before I travel." "Travel?" Sophia asked. "Where are you going?" "To the countryside," Margaret replied. "I want to spend time near nature, to feel the earth again, to live quietly. But before I go, I needed to tell you something." She squeezed Sophia's hand. "You saved my life, but more importantly, you saved my son's soul. You gave him back his heart. Thank you for reminding us what real wealth means." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. You were meant to live. I just helped you see the light again." Margaret smiled, brushing Sophia's cheek. "You truly are a gift." When Sophia left that evening, she looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to shine, and a gentle wind brushed against her face. She whispered a small prayer, not for herself, but for all the people who would come to the foundation seeking hope. Over the years, the Sophia Foundation grew across the country. Hospitals and schools joined hands to support it. People didn't just talk about medicine anymore. They talked about compassion, faith, and humanity. Many said that just being inside the foundation's buildings gave them a strange sense of calm. Edward changed completely. He no longer lived for money or fame. Instead, he spent his days running the foundation, meeting families, and helping the poor. He often thought about how his mother's near-death experience, and a maid's humble daughter, had transformed his entire life. Years later, when Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep, her last words to her son were, "Keep her light alive," and he did. Sophia, now a young woman, continued her quiet life. She never sought attention or glory. Yet, wherever she went, people felt something different. A presence that reminded them that kindness and belief could change the world. One day, while visiting the foundation, Edward saw a sick child sitting alone in a wheelchair. Sophia knelt beside the boy, smiled, and whispered a prayer. The boy smiled back, his eyes bright with new hope. Edward stood there watching, and for a moment, he felt the same peace he had felt the night his mother was healed. He realized something profound. The real miracle was never just about healing bodies. It was about healing hearts. As Sophia walked past him, she looked up and said softly, "Miracles don't end, Mr. Langston. They just move from one heart to another." Edward smiled, his eyes warm. "You're right, Sophia. You've taught us all that." And as she walked away, the evening sun cast a golden glow over the foundation's walls, as if the heavens themselves were smiling. The world had found faith again, all because one humble girl believed that love was stronger than anything else. And somewhere deep inside, everyone who heard her story began to believe the same.